Another reason I was excited about uh, being asked to do part two is that I really liked the idea of being in conversation with the production of part one, which I know is happening this summer. And I still haven't seen it, so I don't yet know what Penny's chosen to do with it, but I thought, oh, you hardly ever get to do this in the theater, you know, sort of artistically respond to somebody else's work. And my sense about part two is that it takes part one and it sort of turns it on its head, or it cracks it open in some way. And I am really planning to absorb and respond to, sort of improvise off of the production of Henry IV Part 1, which is playing this summer. I think that Part 1 is obviously much more of a war play. There are battle scenes in Part 1. You don't get battle scenes in Part 2. You get plotting in Part 2. You get backroom politics in Part 2. You get scrounging for a nickel when you can, sort of it's almost like in a Dickens story. But I'm very, I think I'm interested in the idea of a certain amount of crossover in the casting, and we'll see how that turns out. But it's early for me in my thinking about the production, but I know that I feel as though the world of Part 2 it's almost takes place in a sort of some version of a construction site. I mean, it's a world under construction. There are lots of great little characters in Part 2, and they may only appear in a couple of little scenes. They may barely speak. There's a lot of expressive. There's a lot of illness. There's a lot of missing parts. There's a lot of kind of creepy desperation on the part of a lot of these little characters, and so it feels like that kind of a canvas, and like a Bosch painting, where you have to look closely and then you see, oh, that person has, a huge head and he's hanging upside down. And I do think also that there's a sort of a Brechtian quality to this play, which means that sometimes it feels like I'm reading Mother Courage, because it's so, because its lens is really on both the movers and shakers and the little people, and it's so much about the economy of civil war and how people capitalize on that in different ways. It feels to me like it might be fun to set this play in a sort of carnival or burlesque or vaudeville. Much as Brecht was fascinated by the circus, and I was saying earlier that I have this great interest in, sort of boardwalk culture, and that how vaudeville and popular culture have sort of that sort of late 19th century, early 20th century interest in all things odd. So I don't know what it'll end up looking like. I'd like there to be a modern element in this production. I don't necessarily know how far that will go. I would like to avoid people only dressed in three-piece suits and combat fatigues, but I definitely feel like underlining the fact that this play it may be about England, but it isn't only about England. It could be also taking place in Africa right now. I mean, any place where the government is in flux. This is a story about a government in flux, and in the middle of it, you have a young man whose father is dying, whose best friend is a bad influence, and who has to make really big choices in order to try, I suppose, to lead his country to a better place.